Good morning, everyone. We'll just give it a minute or so as everyone jumps on to their Zoom on a Tuesday morning, and then we'll get this show on the road. Okay, I think it's 11:01. People will be joining as we go through. So yeah, let's kick off. Good morning. Welcome, everyone, and thank you very much for joining the IAB Europe's Digital Audio Day. My name is Ryan Martin, and I'm a program manager for business marketing for TikTok in the UK, and I also am the chair of the IAB European Brand Advertising Committee, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's event. As many of you know, the IAB is the European level association for digital marketing and advertising ecosystems, and through its membership of national IABs and media, technology and marketing companies, its mission is to lead political representation and promote industry collaboration across Europe. Now, one of the ways we do this is by bringing people together through our events, like the event we have today. So, in terms of brand advertising, a big focus for the committee at the moment is to look closely at existing and emerging channels to increase their awareness and drive investment by providing best practices and guidance. We recently held a CTV event exploring the many facets of the world of connected TV, and today we're delighted to be able to bring you this virtual event to explore another key digital channel that's captivating consumers and brands alike, digital audio. So, why are we focusing on digital audio today? It's no secret that digital audio is capturing a growing share of attention across the globe. According to the recently released IAB Europe ADEX 2020 report, digital audio advertising is growing fast. At 16.7%, it's a small base, but it is growing. Although it's still nascent in terms of market size, 500 million euros was spent across all markets under the study, equating to 1.6% of all display spend in Europe. As such, it's becoming increasingly important for brands to integrate an audio strategy into their marketing plans. It's certainly an exciting topic for all involved in advertising, and it'll be very interesting to explore the themes of that today. Today, we've got a stellar lineup of speakers and panelists in all four sessions. We'll shortly hear a deep dive into the digital audio landscape in 2021 and beyond from our chief economist at the IAB Europe, Daniel Knapp, based on the results of the recently released ADEX 2020 report. We'll then go into our first panel to discuss the digital audio landscape in Europe and further explore how we can help scale the audio advertising opportunity going forward. Next, we'll hear from Mumar Sheikh, Senior Product Manager at Oracle Advertising, who will discuss measuring audio at the moment. We will then go to Benjamin Mass, from Global Managing Director of Strategy and Market Development at Triton Digital, as he shares his strategy and best practices for programmatic monetization of online audio. Following that, we'll hear from Lee Thompson, the Strategy Director at Audio One, as he shares findings from the most recent wave of IAB Ireland's digital audio consumption and behaviour research. Then we'll go on to Adam Bowie, the Business Development Manager at the BBC World Service, who will talk us through the top 10 trends within podcasting, all in 10 minutes. And then we'll close off with Oliver von Wesch, the founder and CEO and consultant of the IAB Tech Lab, in a short Q&A from IAB Europe's Technical Director, Alexandra. I think it's going to be a fascinating couple of hours, and we're very grateful for all our experts taking the time to speak to us all today. So thank you in advance to all of them. I just want to highlight to you all that every speaker is a member of the IAB Europe. So if you'd like information how you can get involved in future events, please do contact Helen and Lauren. Now, before we kick off, we're trying out a new thing this year. Just want to establish who the stakeholders are who we've got in attendance today in the audience. So we're going to run a very quick poll now. So if you wouldn't mind completing the poll that's appearing on your screen. And also, if you could mention, if you are other, please drop into the chat box who it is, where it is that you're joining us from. And as well as the poll that we've just run there, there'll be opportunities for you to participate in the panel as well. There'll be a Q&A in the audience. So if you have any questions for today's panelists, please submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom window, and we'll address them as and when we can. Right. So a few others are popping in. I just await my results on screen. So here we go. We've got 32% of you are all from agencies. We've got 22% from ad tech providers, and then a mixture of media, publishers, press and advertisers, and then a few others in there, which hopefully you guys have said who you are in the chat box. Right then, so thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that bit of crowd and audience participation. But without further ado, I'll hand over to the IAB Chief Economist, Daniel Knapp, for a deep dive into the audio landscape. Daniel, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ryan, for the introduction, and a very good morning, good day to all of you. I would like to provide you just with a whistle-stop tour of the audio landscape as it currently is unfolding in Europe. Ryan rightly highlighted that the market is still quite nascent. We talk about audio a lot, but there's still a gap between the volume of listening and the palpable excitement in the industry and the actual euros, pounds, zlotys, and so forth that are actually being poured into this market. But this is changing rapidly. So we recently released our AdX benchmark study, which is a meta-analysis of ad spend in 28 European countries. For the first time, we had a consistent picture of the digital audio landscape, which is the first indication, really, that the market is reaching some sense of maturity as local trade bodies start reporting numbers, and numbers that are comparable and consistent. This is already very good news, and that will just help us benchmark and better understand where this market is going to go. We all knew that 2020 was an exceptional year for digital advertising. And we didn't hear so much about audio, probably in the public, as everything was focused on performance channels, on will programmatic rebound, what's the video opportunity, etc. But behind the scenes, in a sense, we saw audio pace ahead with exceptional double-digit growth. So in a 69.4 billion euro market, growing 6.3% overall in 2020 across 28 European markets, if we just break this out and see where does audio fit among all these different formats, we can see it was doing quite well. It was growing as fast as social, and only the social video subsegment was growing faster than audio. And this is just audio overall. If we break out subsegments in audio, we can actually see that there is further growth happening. Overall, let's factor out social, because it's a very different market, and look at the overall display market in Europe. So banners, native, video, and also we count, like many national IABs, do audio as part of this display world and see how is it actually performing. And we can see that if we factor out social, audio grew a little bit more, even 16.7%. And it was growing faster than banners, faster than video, but you can see it's just a 500 million euro market, 502 to be precise. So still a far cry from the video revolution and still a far cry from the banner market, but things are changing quite quickly, as I will show you at the end of this presentation. Now, whereas overall audio grew by 16.5%, we can see very different trends within the audio landscape. So if we zoom in the middle of this chart first, we can see that podcast advertising was outperforming advertising around music streaming content by a factor of 4.9. So podcast advertising grew nearly 43% in the pandemic. Overall, we can see podcast advertising increased its share of the total audio opportunity from just below 1/4 to actually above 1/4, with 28.1% of all spend on digital audio now being allocated to podcast. It varies by market. The UK is leading market in this, Sweden is leading market, France, Germany. But then if we look further into south of Europe and also Eastern Europe, we see that stronger monetization in terms of music. And also we see that in smaller markets, the podcast production costs, etc., are still hindering to scale that opportunity. So overall, we have a podcast market of 141 million euros in Europe and a music streaming market of around 261 million euros. Bear in mind that all these figures do not include non-IP delivery digital radio, right? DVB radio and so forth. This is all not included in these figures. But from the macro picture, let's kind of try to zoom into some other segments. We will talk about programmatic in this session today, and the overall, including audio, the overall programmatic market, as I showed initially, grew by 8.3%, and Europe now is a programmatic first display market, where over 50% of display and video spend is transacted programmatically. Go to the right side and see what's happening in audio. We see programmatic is still a small component of audio, but it's growing rapidly. In the last 2 years, the vast majority of audio was transacted on a manual basis. We saw the programmatic infrastructure come in slowly, mainly in the US, but also I think in Europe, and notably, in particular, some radio sales houses, for instance, in Germany, were building up proprietary functionalities. But the audio share was quite low. But if we look at it right now on the right side, we could see that within a given year, the audio share, the programmatic share of audio doubled. And we saw a 77.6% increase in terms of programmatic and an 8.9% increase in terms of non-programmatic audio, meaning there's a lot of growth coming now from programmatic and not just anymore from what was mainly, in particular in the podcast space in the past, host-read ads and so forth. So it means that there's more automation coming in, more intermediaries coming in, but it also means that monetization, in particular for niche audiences, for smaller podcasts, for instance, or different types of music, is being monetized better. Digital audio didn't have a bad year in 2020, it only had a bad quarter. So here we can see monthly ad spend trajectory on a year-on-year basis by format in Europe during the pandemic. And we can see that audio took a hit in March, April, and May, but was already recovering in the second quarter, at the end of the second quarter, had decent growth in Q3, and then was outperforming all other digital segments in Q4. This kind of correlates very well with the Spotify quarterly results, which I checked out recently, where we saw really the only quarter that declined was Q2, that was globally, and then I think it was 8.8% growth in Q3 and then double-digit growth in Q4. So the European picture kind of amplified trends that we could see on a global basis. What about different markets? Actually, most markets in Europe posted double-digit growth in digital audio, and France actually nearly grew 100%. And if we dive into the French figures, we could see that programmatic in France actually was growing over 400% from a small base, but it was growing rapidly. And we can see there are quite a few markets which are growing, which have been growing above the European average growth of 16.5%. And the remarkable thing is that these are markets that are both mature digital markets, so with high ad spend per capita, but also those which are emerging markets. For instance, Turkey, a market which is moving up the ranks from kind of, it's now in the top 10 markets in Europe in terms of size, growing quite strongly. And the only market that was taken a hit was Belarus due to the revolutionary environment there. But then also, if we look at Belgium, I think that might be a measurement issue in particular, as Belgium has a very, very, very strong radio landscape, and this might have affected the digital audio growth as well. We can see that the UK is now the biggest digital audio market in Europe. This is all converted in 2015 euros, but the UK lead isn't as far as in other formats. So we can see in overall display or video, the UK has a 3x or 3.5x lead to the next market. It's only 2x in this case, and we can see Germany with coming in a very strong second, and also the home of Spotify, Sweden, a fairly small market, but a very digitally mature market, actually taking the third rank. The digital audio share, so which is kind of the share that digital audio has of the overall display segment, is fairly consistent across the majority of markets, where we were an average of 1.6%. And we can see many, in particular, established markets, France, UK, Germany, Denmark, Netherlands, Italy, they all fall in that range. And we can see it's mainly CEE markets where this is still underdeveloped. And we have two real outlier markets, Belgium, with the very strong classic radio or audio heritage overall, and also Sweden, the home of Spotify. If we try to cluster these markets and try to organize a little bit where they currently fit, we can see a remarkable picture. So here the size of the bubble represents the size of the market. On the x-axis, digital audio share of display ad spend is an indication of the maturity of the market. And then growth here on the y-axis is kind of notion of the vibrancy. We can see Sweden really is an outlier market in terms of digital audio, but we can see remarkably that a lot of markets are very similar in their stage of development. So Germany, Norway, Denmark, Netherlands, Italy, Finland, UK, they're all cluster around a similar spectrum in this market. Now, one thing that happened, I think, which is remarkable to show, is that it's a time to grow digital audio revenues, but it's not necessarily for publishers a time to grow digital audio margins. I'm taking a Spotify example here just because their SEC filings provide a very rich canvas to explore this argument. What you could see is that in 2020, despite healthy revenue gains of around 10% overall in ad-funded audio, Spotify's advertising gross margin decreased so far that it was just below 1%. And that was because costs increased so much. Number one, it was the podcast costs. So this was an investment in the future. Adding new content, creating new content, it's the equivalent to Hollywood studios, in a sense, doubling down on production to really capitalize long-term on a trend. So that was a major new investment, but the other things were remarkable. If we look at royalty costs, for instance, and delivery costs, these are all due to a consumption increase as people stayed at home. But consumption grew much faster than ad monetization, meaning the costs grew, but revenues couldn't offset those costs. This is likely going to be corrected in 2021, but it really shows that the audio opportunity is a long game and that investment in content is essential, and it's not the time to talk about margins. But we can see how vibrant the market is because the global M&A landscape in digital audio is accelerating. After an already record 2020, we already have more deals between January and April 2021 than in the entire year of 2020. And if you look at this range here, and I'm sure we'll hear more about this in the next panels, we can see it's happening across a spectrum of players. It's an entire ecosystem. It's about production. It's about programmatic advertising. It's about podcasting. It's about creator tools, etc., with kind of healthy valuations. And we can see a lot of, if we look at the buyer side, a lot of consolidation happening with Apple, iHeartMedia, Amazon, Spotify, and so forth coming to the fold. Remarkable, I find, is the Tidal acquisition by Square, a payment company now tapping into the audio opportunity, seeing there are adjacent sectors which are also on non-kind of advertising or media native sectors that are eyeing the audio opportunity. Lastly, let me provide you a little outlook. So we saw consistent growth over the last couple of years to 502 million in terms of ad spend on digital audio in Europe, but it's really just the beginning. And we see strong indications that the audio market is only just on the cusp of taking off. We are confident in conversation with players and analysis of public filings that the growth in streaming hours we've observed during the pandemic will not be reset to pre-pandemic levels in 2021. Listening growth will actually resume. We also see that with ad demand coming back now, the gap between consumption and monetization will shrink. Podcast monetization in particular is going to be improved beyond host-read ads, which made it more kind of artisanal than scalable. That is changing. We're seeing advancements in measurements and metrics, still a lot of work to do. I'm very sure a panel will touch on this topic. And we're seeing some players just are coming in right now. For instance, Amazon monetizing its Alexa devices for kind of an audio platform, and also, of course, potentially connecting the very rich first-party data to audio advertising, allowing it to play very differently in the overall purchase funnel. Lastly, we see the emergence of programmatic in audio as a really good means of connecting audio to the other display media. banner, video, and so forth, so that it isn't being booked and operated as a standalone channel, but can be integrated into an omni-channel strategy. And with those thoughts, I would like to pass back to Ryan, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Fascinating insight into the world and the details of the digital audio market and some of the interesting developments to look out for. So now we're going to move on to our first panel of the day as we look to explore the digital audio landscape a little bit further. And don't forget, as we go through this, you can submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll review your questions and put a selection of them to the panel as we go through. So without further ado, I think I can hand over to our panel.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the audio landscape panel. My name is Catherine. I work at IAB UK, and my role over at IAB UK is very much looking after all of our audio work. And I would like to kick off by welcoming our panel. So perhaps if I can invite everybody to introduce themselves in the order of your images on the slide, that would be wonderful.
Hello, I'm Andre Charles Foster, Senior Product and Innovation Manager at Saxis.
Hello everyone, my name is David Gollard. I'm Senior Director of Business Development at Double Verify. I'm also the Chair of IAB Europe's Programmatic Trading Committee.
Hi everyone, I'm Diana Romero. I work for the Digital Standards team at PMX Global, looking at all the emerging trends across emerging channels and looking at the standards across them and measurement as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Jan Kumin. I'm Director Digital Advertising Technology at Bauer Media Audio, so working with our 8 audio markets in Europe.
Thank you. So just to kick us off, I would love to just have a bit of a discussion about what Daniel discussed. So really interesting to get that kind of broader overview on the digital audio landscape. And just 2 things that sort of stuck out to me from that presentation is obviously the huge growth in podcasting last year. I mean, we saw it in the UK market, but it's certainly across Europe, up 43% in a pandemic year. That is absolutely phenomenal. And also just something that stuck out to me was, the share of programmatic in audio was up 77.6%. I mean, that is absolutely huge. And I know it's coming from a small base, but that is absolutely stellar growth. And I think both indications as to kind of what the future of audio might look like. And also, the piece about mergers and acquisitions over the last year. I mean, the landscape's constantly changing around us. But I'd love to sort of throw a question out to the panel and just get your perspective on, what did you think about that presentation? Was there anything that surprised you, anything that really resonated, in particular looking at the markets that each of you work across? I will open that one out to the floor.
I don't mind going first on that. To be honest, it kind of rang true for what we saw over 2020, especially the graph showing the different months and the revenue. So we literally probably followed exactly the same kind of trend line of a really strong start to the year, and then obviously the restrictions came in and everybody saw the dip that happened, and then the second half of the year with an accelerated Q4 is what we saw, and even the countries kind of aligned as well. So yeah, so for us at Zaxis, it was rang true everything that was presented.
Yeah, I agree with that, and what we have seen as well over the past year with the pandemic and the lockdown, consumer behavior definitely changed in the sense that people wanted more a connection with what they were listening and what they were watching. And I think those trends for sure reflect the great opportunity that the audio space provides for everyone. It really opens up that space for brands to really have a closer relationship with consumers. Consumers listen to podcasts, and especially That's true for podcasts. So the podcast space provides that sort of close relationship with users, where they are listening on the go. They are choosing to listen to a specific content, and it provides that sort of like brand safety solution, if you like, for brands to really approach the space. So I think definitely reflects not only what we have seen from a publisher's perspective, but I think it's a global trend as well.
You agree from a publisher point of view. I think I can only echo what you just said. I think exceptional year, of course, last year, but we also saw quite sharp increase actually in audio consumption, and a lot of people rediscovering radio, for instance, when they spend more time at home listening to the new smart speakers, and the first brands that they come to think of when giving their first commands is a radio station that they've listened to before. So I think that companionship, I think, of audio in its different forms, I think really proven strong last year. And then on the numbers, I think it's really good to see more numbers and sort of high quality numbers for the market to analyze. There's less speculation, and we can start to focus on other topics than just trying to understand the basic market development.
And from my perspective, I mean, it was a fantastic analysis and presentation from Daniel, as always. And with regards to the future look, I thought it was really exciting to see 2025 forecasted kind of audio investment of north of 2.6 billion. So I think that's really promising. That kind of showcases the excitement around this emerging channel. I think a number of the topics we're going to talk about around complexity and industry standards all need to be addressed and supported by every industry stakeholder if we want to get close to that kind of 2.6 plus billion in 2025 in the audio environment for Europe.
Thanks very much. And before we get onto the sort of really complex side of things, it might just be a good idea to just take a step back and just talk about definitions, just to kind of kick us off. So just before we get into it, could somebody please define for me, what do we mean by digital audio? What does that include in an advertising conversation? Just so we make sure that everybody in our audience is kind of starting on the same page here.
I don't mind doing a real simple one here. Digital audio is a representation of sound and content recorded in or converted into digital form, and includes digital radio, podcasts, emerging voice, integrations, and music streaming. However, Daniel's presentation wasn't including digital radio in that scenario. So I know there's kind of a couple of variations, but that's like at its simplest form. I think the complexity comes into or is due to the wide variety of kind of devices digital audio is consumed on, and the variety of ways, such as downloaded podcasts versus streamed, which make digital audio both a fantastic opportunity, but also an interesting industry challenge.
Great, thank you. And just looking sort of across Europe, maybe I'll ask this question to Andre. How is digital audio currently being bought and sold across Europe? And particularly in your role, are you seeing any key differences across different markets?
Yeah, there's some really kind of interesting differences. So when we look at, Daniel kind of leaned on it, for example, anyway, in the way how kind of Southern and Eastern Europe and how they are less podcast heavy. So the UK side, they are more into podcasts. We saw fantastic podcast growth in revenue wise from the UK, but looking across the markets, there was still growth, but it wasn't the same sort of growth. And I think that has a lot to do with the kind of local market language content that is available. Obviously, there's a proliferation of English speaking content as far as podcast is concerned. But as far as local language content, that's a little bit behind. But as soon as we see that increase, I'm sure podcasting will come more into the other markets. For us as well, we obviously do everything programmatically. So there's no kind of direct IO buys, host reads, stuff that's not how we we buy. So from that perspective, we are kind of growing on that from there. And then, yeah, just again, the main difference that we've seen is around that local language content. A lot of markets asking for more, essentially, to enable the growth. Their advertisers are asking for that.
Great, thank you. And I don't know, Jan, if you can speak to that from a publisher perspective as well, kind of what your clients are asking for.
Absolutely. I'm happy to hear that there's demand for local content. That's what we produce, and also increasingly producing podcast series in local language, and distributing over our own aggregator services, be it Radio Play or Pod Play, especially in the Nordics. So I think we're in that market as well, and we see growth definitely aligned with what we saw in the reports earlier today. When it comes to programmatic, again, I think or trading as a whole, I think there's a big gap between those local small advertisers who still see digital audio as just an extension to their existing broadcast campaigns, and then on the other end, agencies also here represented looking at really advanced sort of podcast sponsorship kind of approaches, or advanced targeting or programmatic trading, which I've been working a lot on the past 6 to 12 months. And I think we're close to the moment when it's about to take off, but I think there's still work that has to be done to make sure that trading, also automated trading, is actually smooth and easy for buyers.
Thank you. And Diana, I don't know if you want to, I know in your role, you translate sort of global standards for local European markets, if you can kind of share kind of your perspective as well.
Yeah, for sure. We definitely try to leverage the best solutions in market to really put the audience first. We have Publicis Media global partnerships with the main suppliers and providers in the audio space, and we endeavor to really work with them to get direct deals in place to provide that level of transparency that our clients are demanding for. We know that the channel is still sort of in not infancy, but it's growing and it's always evolving. There are some lack of common measurements, and obviously protection in this space is limited in terms of brand safety, or even how do you measure fraud, or the media quality metrics that we're used to across other kind of like media channels. So we're trying to really leverage those conversations with the partners and to translate that into our local markets here in Europe. We do see a great opportunity when we approach the audio space in the podcasting area. We definitely want to continue to engage with the consumers closely, and to really also leverage the programmatic solutions that are in the market, because that allows us to really integrate with other digital buys. So we're definitely trying to continue those conversations, and we're trying to really bring that sort of first party approach on direct deals into the conversations as well.
David, I spotted you unmuted yourself there. Did you want to?
I was just going to say, just high level from us, looking at some of the data where we see DV's tags run in audio platforms, we're seeing audio adoption accelerating at speed in Europe in a similar way to Daniel Knapp's kind of presentation alluded to, but also really interestingly in a similar way to the early days of connected TV adoption as well. So we're seeing that kind of parity there, where we're seeing that extreme acceleration, but again, it's from a low base. However, signs look promising for the future.
And just thinking about sort of buying habits, so I'd be interested to know, what does a digital audio buying strategy look like at the moment? And interestingly, in particular, how does that differ across different mediums within audio? So obviously podcast, radio, streaming. Perhaps I could throw that one to Andre as well, and then we can sort of, if anyone has anything to add, feel free to jump in.
yeah, it's really kind of interesting nuances across kind of the almost three verticals, if you say, around kind of the broadcast, IP radio, podcasting, or music streaming. So for for podcasting, for example, it's more of a contextual buy. You get some really interesting niche audiences, and if you think about how you listen to podcasting, and like the saying of an echo chamber, but generally you go and you listen to a podcast because it's something you find interesting, you want to find some more information, so you really have that attention. So I think as a strategy and as a buyer, you've really got to think about how you're going to settle into that environment and ensure that it fits with that. Around the kind of IP broadcasting, if you partner with people like Bauer and the other good publishers who are enabling first-party data, then you can use some kind of clever optimizations around the audiences, and also using kind of efficient buying around the kind of listen through rates that you're seeing as well. So that's another thing that's kind of really interesting. Obviously, away from what we do, you've got the host read direct IO, which obviously is a slower growth area, as Daniel's presentation alluded to. But it's obviously something that if you're looking to get an affiliation with the audience, it can be a powerful way of actually, having your brand be noticed in the environment as well.
Great, thanks. That's something I'm very conscious of, is there really is a podcast for everything, I think, and you're so right on that. You can really find people's niche audiences. Just speaking from a personal perspective, I'm absolutely obsessed with the Tour de France. I listen to like 3 different podcasts a day. Just any content I could get, I'm obsessed with it. But yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? And how like they kind of differ across the different, as you say, audio verticals, kind of what the opportunities are there for advertisers. I don't know if anyone else would like to sort of jump in as well and share their perspective here.
I think some of the trends we've seen, I think this is where market maturity is quite different. I think UK clearly ahead of many of the other European markets, but in the Nordics, I've also seen, instead of sort of host-read ads, a lot of sort of native solutions with product placement kind of approaches where the product actually links to the content, and there's a sort of natural fit, and that seems to be gaining popularity. And then some sponsorship podcasts as well, but they of course always have the challenge of making sure they actually are appealing and that they get enough distribution to sort of justify the cost with production.
I don't mind jumping in here as well. I mean, speaking generally around buying habits, buyers, from our understanding and the communication we're having with our client base, still want to authenticate media quality in audio, as they do in other digital environments. However, the approach to audio needs to be bespoke. Challenges, there are a number of challenges. I'll highlight a couple. For example, like in podcasts, there's a challenge with regards to downloaded versus streamed, and with the downloaded, you lose some of the real-time data in there. So there's one of the things as an industry we need to overcome to understand how we can authenticate media quality there, and also get the data out to inform future optimizations, etc. Now, delivering content level transparency is a key one to build trust in the audio space, to enable greater investment as well. And content level transparency is to deliver or enable brand safety and suitability or contextual targeting. And this is another good example about the approach to audio. Now, for live streaming audio, it requires a similar approach to kind of video-only environments such as connected TV, understanding kind of what metadata around the content can be passed via macros, for example, in VAS macros, to the end user, or to the tech providers and the advertisers as well, to enable them to get that content level transparency. However, podcasts are up a slightly different challenge. And the podcasts at the moment have a wide level of content. As you said, there's a podcast for everything, and also the conversation can bounce around from topic to topic. And podcasts are being transcribed at the moment to enable many things, but one of the use cases is classification. And for us, that's great because we have a semantic science division at Double Verify that takes an ontological approach to kind of text on page approaches, mainly around websites to understand the true meaning of the page. We can do that in multiple languages, I think 48 at current count, and we have multiple rules that do that. However, the approach for podcasting needs to be slightly bespoke compared to a web page. A web page tends to have kind of a lot of content around one key topic. However, a podcast transcribes is obviously two people in a flow, in a conversation, and it jumps around from topic and topic. So there are things we need to take, a different bespoke approach to audio and audio environments to enable the customer or our clients, meet our clients' needs to enable them to authenticate media quality. And these are just a couple of examples to highlight that it isn't a kind of lift and shift from other environments, whether it's video or web, that we need to really think long and hard around. We'll come on to standards later, but how we can deliver the same tools that support other areas of our industry and enable them to scale in audio.
I think what David just mentioned is definitely critical for the channel to continue to grow. I think there is definitely that limitation in terms of, okay, how can we provide that full transparency? And we have seen it on CTV as well. I think CTV space has grown so much and way faster than I expected due to the pandemic and everything. But there are solutions that are in place that are kind of like trying to solve those kind of key measurement and transparency discussions that we have with our clients. And we see this also happening in the audio space. I think it's fantastic to see that all sides of the industry, they're working on, obviously it comes from the IAB, they are aligning with the IAB content categories, etc., to really provide that transparency. And I think as we move into the next year, few years down the line, I think it's going to be fully it will be able to fully provide that level of transparency, and we will be able to offer our clients and everyone in the industry that sort of the same sort of controls and solutions that we have for different channels to the audio space as well, which is going to be critical definitely for the space to continue to grow, especially in markets where they're less mature as well. So I think it's also really key to continue to see that how's that happening, and those conversations are happening at the local level.
Thanks, guys. And just sort of taking I guess a bit of a step back, I'd be really interested to hear, and I think, I mean, Daniel's fantastic presentation really set us up well to have this kind of next conversation, but what do you guys think are the biggest developments that are happening, that are being made in digital audio advertising right now? I mean, Daniel touched on mergers and acquisitions. There's a lot of investment from big tech, you know, the likes of Facebook sort of getting interested in this space. There's some really interesting synergies between the audio and gaming space. Just three things off the top of my head, but I'd be absolutely fascinated to hear kind of each of your perspectives on, you know, what are the biggest developments. Andre, do you want to go first? Everyone was looking very politely.
Going first again, but happy to take lead. We could probably spend a whole kind of hour talking on the latest developments that are happening within the audio space, such as the kind of accelerated growth and the challenges that different partners, players are trying to meet. I'll go through a couple very quickly. So like Daniel had pointed out, the mergers and acquisitions, so the moves by those bigger players, and they're all moves either to increase content or, for our side, improve the workflow, making that content programmatically available. You know, we're looking at iHeart buying Triton, Spotify, and their purchase of Megaphone, and you know, Amazon buying Wondery, and I think there was a recent purchase of Art19. So they're all plays around, and be really interesting as they kind of move on and develop, and the next kind of 12 months, what do those purchases look like, and how, for us, especially at Xaxis, how do they play out? How can we access those audiences, those shows, and that content in a way that allows us to add on top of our kind of AI technology and optimization that our traders use. Another one I would really like to touch upon is dynamic audio. So using creative to really personalize the message, adjust to the context that's happening as well. So rather than kind of just a one message going across everything, you can really use the different channels within, like to talk about broadcast, streaming, podcast, and different context, day of the week, etc., to ensure that that message is really as relevant as possible to the people that you're trying to reach. You've got voice ads that are happening. So for the UK, for example, I think that we were looking at 40% smart speaker penetration. The US is even higher, but it's lower in the rest of the EMEA market. So how will that start to affect how people are buying as that goes forward? And like you had mentioned, Catherine, we've got LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, all moving in following the success of Clubhouse and releasing kind of those kind of products. So what does that mean? When does it become available to us? What does that look like? Again, you know, these developments are going to really open up the audio space for everybody, because, you know, those three are about monetization of their audiences. So we will see things start to be released into market. And lastly, one really interesting thing, like you mentioned, was how does audio fit into gaming? Gaming's a massive audience that's coming through. So what does that look like again, and how do you fit into that space without it being an interruption? So yeah, I know that was a lot, but you know, the different mergers, the dynamic audio, the voice ads, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and their audio releases that are coming in audio and gaming, they're all really interesting developments that we're seeing coming through.
And just a quick follow-up question on that. So on sort of audio and gaming, dynamic creative, the rise of sort of like social audio, are your clients sort of interested and asking you questions about all of these developments, or is it more sort of you're advising them about what's going on in the space? I'm just kind of curious to see how much like this is sort of our world, right? We're so interested in this sort of stuff, but I'm not sure if clients are asking for these different developments or not.
Like any kind of audience or like adoption, you've got your early adopter clients who, you know, they want to be in the brand new thing. Like, how can we get into, you know, how can we get into like Twitter or LinkedIn and their audio solutions that are coming in, or, you know, they want dynamic audio to really push that relevance, or looking at gaming and how the different approaches you can get to that. But most of our clients sit into a solution where we will discuss it with them and how they can utilize that on a kind of strategy level first. But the activation into local markets will then come with the maturity of the solutions once they become wider adopted, and obviously those players themselves going into the clients and pitching their solutions and how it works, and then we just, you know, partner with them, consult with them, and how to best to use it.
Yeah. Cool. We actually did a piece of research last year about SMEs, and something that we've learned is that for the smaller companies, if they want to try something, they kind of need evidence of a bigger company or a similar company doing it. So you're right, there's the sort of really willing early adopters, and I think everybody else is just sort of looking around and waiting to see if it works from someone else before they try it. So yeah, there's definitely a few different approaches. But David, I'd be fascinated to hear your perspective. You're obviously from Double Verify, you sit in a slightly different position, but be interested to hear what you think are the kind of biggest developments.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to be really boring and echo Andre, but I couldn't, and Daniel as well with his presentation earlier. The consolidation is really exciting, but I think with the acquisitions we're seeing a few things which hopefully will make it more attractive to buyers to buy. So obviously these acquisitions will drive a few things, greater content, or a wider variety or high quality content as well, enabling more audiences to come. With regards to the kind of some of the tech acquisitions, it's kind of consolidating the media landscape as well. So supply isn't as fragmented. So there's kind of more consolidation when it comes to buying channels, so it makes it easier for buyers to buy, which is really important because they want to buy where their audiences are. And with the greater investment of buyers as well, we'll see a push for more industry standards to be adopted as well, because buyers tend to say we want to, again, we're talking about authenticating media quality and making sure that this inventory is what it says it is. That normally drives with industry standards being brought in. So whether it's the adoption of open measurement, and obviously open measurement 1.3 comes with audibility support as well. So we want to see greater adoption of that, and making sure that third-party tags are being accepted by these environments. That all brings confidence. So what we're hoping for in a consolidation is, greater content, larger audiences, easier access to supply, and also ways to authenticate media quality in those environments. That should lead to greater investment. But let's just say audio still looks really, really exciting, and developments are happening now are helping drive towards that goal of that kind of 2025 outlook that Daniel presented at.
Great. Jan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, just to comment, I think from a publisher's point of view, I think if I would need to choose 2 or 3 different areas that are really important, I think innovation around content is extremely important. So I think both podcasts, which we have already covered today a lot, but also around commercial radio content. I mean, we have initiatives now in Poland with RMF where we are trying to test a bit a personalized experience around radio, where you can actually choose, weather or news or host, and create a sort of personalized experience for your radio stream. So that's one path. And then in UK, we recently launched Audio Plus, so a subscription-based model, of course, not linked to advertising, but again, another commercial initiative describing that the market definitely is innovating around different, monetization models, but also content as a whole. Then I think the second one would be programmatic for me. Somehow I think that's a big change and shift. And I think we're quite close, but it feels like we would still need to work together and make sure that we remove as much complexity as possible by being really transparent and open. But also I think putting a big pressure on the tech platforms on making sure the integrations are really complete and solid, and that it's easy to buy audio inventory with easier audience selection and really good sort of listening KPIs in reports, and sort of getting the basics in place to really sort of scale that opportunity for everyone. So I think these would be my 2 points.
Thank you. I'm fascinated by the idea of personalized radio. I think that sounds incredible. And Diana, would you like to share your perspective as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think some of what all of you guys have mentioned already, but I think it is important to continue to see how the evolution of measurement and standards translate into the audio buys, and how those are actually evolving to solve for local market challenges as well. I think obviously a lot of the conversations and partnerships are driven in the US, but we definitely need to continue to translate that into the different regions, and we need to continue to push for education in terms of what the channel is, what it brings, the opportunities it has as well. Educate not only our teams and the industry, but also our clients, and for them to understand how can they unlock those unique opportunities that definitely resonate very well with the audiences that they want to engage with. So for sure, it's a space that we are very much looking forward to continue to work in, and we're definitely driving those relationships and conversations here to Europe. So really looking forward to continue to see how this space is evolving, and in partnership with everyone in the industry and from a media perspective as well.
Thanks. So I've got one more question before we move to audience questions. And I imagine some of the things we've covered will come up again here, but just to give you guys the opportunity to share your thoughts on this. So what do you think is the one thing that the industry should prioritize to really accelerate audio training across Europe in the next 6 to 12 months? If you could pick one single thing.
Kind of to echo David, Jan and Diana, to be honest, around that measurement piece, if we can get the measurement obviously leads to transparency. Again, as more budgets increase, bigger advertisers come on board, start having always on campaigns and really trying to be innovative in their approaches to the audiences. They need that measurement. They need to know where they're running, who's listening, how, and from our perspective, we need to know more about being able to optimize on the different data points. So, you know, maybe being closer together with the DSPs, the publishers, driving kind of that measurement piece, because I fear that without it, you know, the growth will start to stagnate. So to give you a really quick example, last year we were told, you know, video and CTV were the priorities for the different tech partners. So for us, and trying to work with audio and push that further, it was a little frustrating. That is actually turning the corner now in 2021. So now it's back on to, or being reprioritized. That hopefully will allow us to push measurement forward as well.
Again, agreeing, but I think one of the critical things here is like measurement is critical, as is authentic and media quality, whether it's around measurement, viewability, brand suitability, brand safety, fraud, geo, etc. But to enable that, we need to make sure the standards are in place. So the measurement is enabled if there's a wide adoption, for example, of the in-app environments where a lot of the audio is being consumed, of open measurement. And we need to make sure that all of us, all stakeholders, whether you're tech, publisher, advertiser, are working in unison to adopt these standards. So we're in a good place when clients are ready to start shifting significant portions of the budget, all of them are in place, and enabling them to have the measurement to say, yes, audio is the right place for our advertising as well. And to do that, I think, you know, we've got a couple of transparency, and the industry will need to listen and adopt that. So hearing that the tech providers need to hear that audio is a priority now for these advertisers to make the necessary changes. Publishers also need to hear that to make sure that they can invest time to put in the standards in place, because standardization and transparency are key to accelerate. Otherwise, we'll lead to brand safety issues or IVT issues when the money moves over, and that'll not be healthy for growth.
Just a short comment on that. I couldn't agree more. I think all of that is really important, and for the publishers, and that's where I think we also need to spend more time in making sure we get consent from all different third-party distribution, you know, partners. And that sounds simple, but it's not that simple when it comes to audio. So there needs to be some development and innovation around that still. So that's definitely an area where we need to do our homework. I think we have enough inventory for now for the programmatic market, and that's fine. But going forward, we need to improve there.
Great. I don't know if Diana, you wanted to cover your perspective as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's as we've all mentioned it, I think it's critical to have that sort of commonality and measurement in place to really develop the standards. I think it's also important to really understand that the difference of this channel versus the even CTV or display or any other programmatic solution. How do you measure success as well? How do you translate those some of those metrics into an emerging channel like audio? What are kind of like the key areas where you could potentially have those very good opportunities for clients to really achieve KPIs? And it doesn't mean, are we still looking at the standards that will be translated from other channels like viewability or audio metrics? How is that going to be amalgamated to really get a holistic solution and approach to our clients, and how is that going to look like in the future year or so? So it's going to be something really critical as well to look at.
Thank you. So I'm conscious we're just on 12 o'clock, so I'll cover one of the questions through from the audience. And it just a huge theme of our conversation is kind of education and sort of like measurement and standards, and us getting things right so that people are sort of more willing to dip their toe into the audio industry. And we are seeing huge growth, which is amazing. But there was a question here about where is digital audio spend coming from? I'd be interested to hear if anyone can share their thought on that where are we expecting this money to come from in the future?
Again, I can kind of give a buy-side perspective like Diana will do, I'm sure. But you've got kind of different teams that sit in the agencies. I'm sure the agency listeners will agree. You know, you've got your AV teams who will be part buyers, and that's, you know, looking at how's digital audio fit with audio itself. Don't forget that they're kind of can be two different audiences, especially when you move into podcasting, right? What we've seen, a lot of the audiences can be kind of cord cutters, so it can be hard to reach them in other areas. We've also done some really interesting work in markets that have proven kind of the GRP reach of those audiences against traditional radio. So you don't want to take away, but how do you fit it so you're reaching your total audience for the advertiser on where they're listening? And there's also a couple of interesting places, like how do you fit everything together across the media mix? So stop siloing everything, but how do you touch that person on the journey? And again, we're doing some really interesting work on putting it all together, whether that's audio, digital out-of-home display, video, and really reaching them when they're in the moment, and they're most receptive to advertising.
Yeah, absolutely agree with Andre. And I think, I mean, we have seen in the back of Daniel's presentation, the channel is growing so much that naturally investment is going to also shift towards audio. And I think clients, as the channel grows, are definitely looking at how can they better engage with their audiences, and if it is via new emerging channels, they will continue to do so. And it's obviously in publish's best interest to continue to collaborate with everyone in the industry to continue to provide those solutions for our clients as well. It is important to really have, in terms of the spend and investment, it's definitely going to continue to happen over the next year or so, as we have seen on the back of Daniel's presentation as well. So it is a very, very good opportunity for everyone to really continue to understand how the channel is going to evolve. But there are some challenges around it, so we need to continue to have an open discussion with everyone, from the buy side, supply side, everyone that is providing sort of like that, the spaces to approach the standards, measurement, and solve for some of those challenges to fully unlock the potential of the space.
Great, thank you so much. So I think that's all we have time for. So the last thing I will say is just a huge thank you to Andre, David, Jan, and Diana. It has been absolutely fascinating talking to you and learning a bit more about sort of the wider European market and how exciting audio is across the whole of Europe. Yeah. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, Catherine.
Excellent, thank you.
Thanks very much for all the panelists, and thank you for sharing such valuable insights. I know you've certainly given me and my audience as well a lot to think about. And for those interested in finding out more about the digital audio landscape and opportunities available in this channel, I can direct you to the IAB Europe Digital Audio Guide, which is available to download from the IAB Europe website in the Knowledge Hub section. So please be sure to check it out. Now, next up, we have a keynote presentation on measuring the audio moment with Mumal, who's the Senior Product Manager from Oracle Advertising, who I believe is just joining us in the Zoom now. So I'll pass it over to Mumal. for what should be a great session. Thank you.
Hey, I just want to make sure this is working.
Yep.
All right, sweet. Great. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Ryan. It kind of kicked me off Zoom and brought me back on, so I didn't hear if you wanted me to wait or anything. Am I good to go ahead and get started?
Yep, go ahead. Yeah, go for it.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here, and welcome to everyone who's attending today. What I'd like to do is actually share my screen. We've had some really great discussions, it sounds like, from everybody who had just joined, Danielle and the panelists as well. And a lot of that will be kind of like a good continuation of what we'd like to cover as well. There will be some of just reiterating the same concepts. So let's go ahead and get this up. Great. So within audio environments, I think something that I just like to quickly mention from a measurement standpoint, I am Humal. I am a product manager at Oracle Advertising. I joined Oracle Advertising through the acquisition of Moat, and Moat is a third-party vendor, measurement vendor as well. So I guess what that means is that I've been very heavily involved in all things measurement for quite some time now. And the beauty of the situation that we're in right now is that we have a golden opportunity to figure out how we want to treat audio as our new medium and how we want to create measurement around it. So to start, I think a good idea is to also acknowledge, as an industry, we've done some very cool, very sophisticated things within the display and video environment. But at some point along the way, we seem to have lost sight of the consumer, where going online and consuming any kind of content became a little bit more of a frustrating experience. So it was, you think about latency and so many ads constantly you're being bombarded with. So where we are right now, we have this opportunity to take our learnings from all the sophistication that we had in display and video and all those very neat solutions that we've built out and apply those to audio, while also making sure that we're also making sure that we're taking those learnings from the things that we didn't do so well and course correcting along the way. So there's really no denying that audio has become a big conversation in every digital media buying agency as well. The audio wave is here, and content consumption has consistently been moving towards the audio focused model as well. One of those reasons may be either because of the increase in usage and sales of smart speakers, connected cars. You think about everyone having AirPods, case in point, or even just like your headphones becoming somewhat of a lifestyle choice. Another thing to consider is, of course, the trust deficit that we have in just all things digital media. When consumers are reading content online, they don't quite have that same confidence they once did. There's this skepticism of what you're reading. And yet those same consumers have this loyalty and this trust in these podcasters that they listen to. And we like to think that the reason for that is because audio itself is a very powerful tool of connection. It's not just video without screens. And having that kind of an intimate relationship with someone who's essentially storytelling, it creates that environment where you can have that concentration, you can truly have that positive attitude towards whatever it is that is being advertised within that content stream. Another couple of things to consider around how things are growing in the audio space is just general screen fatigue. When you think about how many screens we all have access to, you go from your TV to your computer to your phone to your second phone, sometimes to your third phone or your iPad. So there's just so many different versions of screens that at some point in time, it just starts to feel very overwhelming. Another interesting stat that I have always found very fascinating when it comes to screen time is that most people who listen to podcasts have subscriptions to Netflix and Amazon Prime, so essentially are cord cutters as well. And I believe Andre might have mentioned this in the earlier panel. And that basically means that they don't have exposure to ads. So this is another reason advertisers are also getting very excited about this audio medium and are also starting to think about it in a few different ways of how to meaningfully connect with their audiences. And of course, the last thing comes down to just having a more on-the-go lifestyle. Think about all of the fitness apps that are there. You think about the significance about being outdoors, having those IRL in real life experiences where you might have music playing in the background. You might be taking a road trip and listening to a podcast, but just not having that screen consistently in your face is starting to become a bigger part of our lifestyle choices as well. So a few other stats that are really interesting, again, reiterating the same exciting momentum that audio has picked up. This is from, I believe this year, very recently, it was reported that there's over 2 million podcasts globally right now in over 100 different languages. Podcasting itself has penetrated about 18% of the global population. So you know the appetite is there and it's only growing. And a very cool insight from a survey conducted by Westwood One found that your concentration while listening to podcasts is 1.5 times higher than that of social media. So this is really not surprising, and a lot of this was already covered by Danielle, the panelists. So it's just reiterating some of the great information we already know about the opportunity that audio presents. No surprise, as content consumption moves to an audio-focused model, advertisers are very quick to follow. Essentially, what they're doing is trying to find those ways to meaningfully connect with their audiences where they can have some level of connection that is outside the scope of what is feeling overwhelming to consumers already. That said, even with these stats right up on the screen around what the digital audio spend is, what podcast ad revenue has been, according to eMarketer for both of these, there's still apprehension in investing in the audio space. And last year in 2020, early March 2020, right before the pandemic was in full swing, I actually attended the Podcast Business Summit in New York, and people were like, kind of like, the elbow high fives and the elbow hellos, and everyone was very confused about what this new COVID thing is that we're hearing of. But what was actually interesting about that too is, what was more interesting about that is that there was actually an agency panel, and they essentially said, not verbatim, but essentially said, yeah, I get it. Audio is great. I listen to audio. Everyone's listening to it. But it's not enough for me for my media planner to come and tell me, hey, me and all of my friends listen to podcasts and music. We should be advertising there more heavily. Essentially, what you need is measurement and transparency so you can reliably and confidently continue your investments in that space. And I think that's essentially where we come in, all kinds of measurement vendors. I believe we all have a responsibility to make sure that we're providing that level of unbiased, accurate, reliable measurement to allow for that confidence for advertisers to invest more heavily. Because as advertisers will invest more heavily in the podcasting and music space, you're ultimately also supporting the ecosystem of journalism, quality storytelling, and creative process in the form of music. So it really is all connected in the ecosystem. And when we started to dig into how we can make this more meaningful and how we can have folks better understand the audio ad experience itself, we start to ask questions like, was the ad served? Was the sound on when the ad was served? Did somebody mute the ad? Did they skip the ad? When you think about the audibility around different quartiles, the MRC has begun a process of some level of standardization, and they now have the MRC audible rate, which is, was the ad audible for 2 continuous seconds? When you think about sonic identity and how long it takes a human brain to recognize a brand based on sound, 2 seconds is often sufficient. There's a lot of examples out there. You can think of your iPhone and how the ringtone is something that's recognizable. You can start to think about McDonald's, even though they don't say McDonald's, you immediately recognize the jingle itself. So that's another measure that helps you better understand the signals of attention within audio. And then you have to understand, is your ad being delivered to a human endpoint, or was it delivered to some level of invalid traffic? And we'll go into this in a little bit more detail in a second as well. The last question you always want to ask is, was my ad served around content that was safe, something that wouldn't hurt my brand reputation? So we'll keep jumping into this, but we'd like to make sure that we break out the integrations itself that exists today. So for digital audio, the way I like to think about this is break it out between music streaming and podcasting. Now within music streaming, you have client-side ad insertion and server-side ad insertion. These are the primary ways that ads are served within music streaming. We'll go into more detail of exactly what that is. Within podcasting, while it may be server-side ad insertion, there are many nuances within podcasting that we need to address as an industry too. So let's go ahead and start with client-side ad insertion. So really what this is that the audio stream and the ad stream are independent of one another. So you have your audio content running, then you have an ad slot, the ad is pushed in there, and then you have your content run again. It's a smooth experience. You don't really notice it very much anyway, but the idea is that they're independent of one another and the player can call either one as needed. Now, server-side ad insertion, you have your audio stream and your ad stream together such that your ad is stitched into the stream of your audio file as well. Now, within podcasting, this gets more nuanced, always more fun. You have your server-side ad insertion model, which is the ad is stitched into the stream. And then you have a few different players as well. So something to consider within podcasting that we have to understand as an industry and eventually solve for, listening behavior within the podcasting world is also different. So you think about folks who are listening at 1.5x, at 2x, some folks who want to forward 15 seconds and then go back 15 seconds because they missed something. So those are things we want to consider of how to accurately and reliably measure, and be very careful not to misclassify any of that, because anytime there's misclassification or poor measurement in the industry, that breaks down trust, and broken trust just means a mess for everybody involved. The other thing about podcasting as well is, to oversimplify it, you have many different players who are involved in the ad delivery process. So you have one vendor who will have the ad, then you'll have a different vendor who will have the content stream, and then a third vendor who is essentially the audio player, where that stitched stream, the ad stitched stream, will be pushed to so that folks can listen to it, folks like us. Sometimes these entities are related, but in most cases they're not related, which is why getting those listener metrics around things that we discussed earlier, like audibility quartiles, MRC rates, that becomes a lot more challenging. We'll talk about what exactly is available today and then what we want to be working towards as well in just a second. So let's start with music streaming. We have the Open Measurement SDK. I believe David and Andre had mentioned this earlier as well. The beauty of this is the Open Measurement SDK itself is an industry-wide initiative to try to create some sort of standardization so we can actually get scale that we're looking for. So JavaScript tags within in-app environments can tell that an ad is there, but they're unable to tell where the ad is, which is why the SDKs were created, so that there's some level of understanding of knowing viewability metrics. So the good news is that same standardization means that folks will be using these metrics for using this SDK to better understand viewability measurement. Now that OM 1.3, which is the latest code that somebody had referred to a little bit earlier too, has the support for audio ads built out as well. And that means that when an ad is playing, when your content is playing in audio and you background your tab, your content and ads, they all just keep running, just the nature of listening to audio, and measurement continues to run as well. Recently, OM has expanded to OM for web, which means this expands that same integration to give you that measurement across desktop and mobile web too. We have the ability to measure through VAST. So very high level, simply put, VAST is essentially just a way for one ad server to communicate with another ad server. And it's essentially pulling the ad that is required into the stream as well, whether it's CSAI, client-side ad inserted, or server-side ad inserted. Programmatic was mentioned a little bit around earlier too, and everyone kind of gets it. It's a little bit more complicated. So similar to when we started doing measurement across mobile in-app about, geez, like 7 years ago, 8 years ago, who knows what time is anymore anyway. But similar to that, where we needed all the different publishers and all the different app partners to start to better understand exactly all the signals that they need to build, the appropriate signals that they need to pass back, the integrations that need to be done for SDKs. We're kind of in a similar position with audio. A lot of the signals just have not been built out previously. So now those signals are starting to get built out. And eventually I feel pretty positive that we're going to get to some level of scale. And this will become a much more reliable way of getting that level of measurement in a much scalable format, as is programmatic. So that's where we are with music streaming. Of course, server-side ad insertion brings its own development work that is often required. It would be like passing the appropriate signals of ad start, ad finish, first quartile, third quartile. And a lot of folks have definitely jumped on board and want to make sure that this measurement is available. For podcasting, nuances all around. You have today measurement that you can do through a 1x1 pixel that gives you downloads and invalid traffic. It's not sufficient because a download is essentially telling you that the stream that the ad was stitched into is downloaded. Is it a good directional metric? Absolutely. Is it enough? Probably not, which is why we want to start figuring out more and start to really go after where we can get those true listener metrics. You also have the opportunity to think about vast URLs instead of the ad itself being placed into the stream. So this not only allows for extended shelf life, where you don't have a podcaster saying something along the lines of like, this July 2021, we're going to be having some promo campaign. And next year, when someone's listening to the podcast, it's just irrelevant and outdated and really just a missed opportunity as well. So having the vast URL in there allows for those ads to be just directly inserted and called based on targeting mechanisms that are available too. Measurement across it itself will have to be figured out through direct integrations. And that's direct integrations with most places where folks are listening to podcasts. Because if you want to start thinking about whether the ad was served, was the sound on, you have to start thinking about it from the perspective of that player and when that player can actually pass back those signals. Programmatic, again, has its own nuances. It's the same complexity that we are trying to solve for. And I think we're starting to get close as an industry. There's just a little bit more work to be done to understand how it can be scaled, but not lose sight of the fact that measurement must remain accurate and the quality of measurement must remain at the center of anything that we're trying to build out. Of course, as soon as advertisers and ad dollars start flowing into any medium, you know, very quick to follow is always going to be invalid traffic. And where we are right now as an industry is we are using the existing method of MRC invalid traffic or the existing standards of MRC invalid traffic to understand what's happening in audio environments. So this includes general IVT and sophisticated IVT. So general IVT is your list-based activity. Sophisticated is a little tougher to do within audio environments. This is mostly because there's someone who's trying to manipulate the system. So we want to understand how that's different in display and video versus audio. So some of the things we've been exploring at Moat and really investigating with our data science teams, which can get super fun and nerdy too, is understanding those nuances. So you have things like hidden ad. What does a hidden ad mean when you're thinking about an audio ad experience? There's oftentimes the way those ads are served that they would get classified. So we want to make sure not to misclassify an ad as invalid traffic, which is why doing this investigation into understanding the nuances is incredibly important. Every time we misclassify an impression, you hurt the sell side of the business. And when you hurt the sell side of the business, that's ultimately where your storytelling is coming from. We may all have our roles in this ecosystem, but we are consumers at the end of the day. So I would really love for my audio experience not to get compromised in terms of quality, simply because there's poor measurement and poor reporting in this space, which is why this is really important to consistently investigate and make sure that we're always trying to stay ahead of the curve. Another few examples I'll just quickly mention includes things like session hijacked. So at Oracle Advertising, we exposed this thing called Stream Scam, which was basically one of the largest CTV operations. And one of the things we look at is session hijacked as well. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of what we know in display and video as suspicious activity would be if your phone is on charge, your screen is locked, and your content and ads are still running in the background. Now for display and video, I get that that's suspicious, but that's just the nature of listening to audio. You're not carrying your phone around. Most likely it is on charge, your screen is locked, and you are just doing whatever your activity is while your content and your ads are playing. So taking that into account is definitely another one that we have to we have to consider and make sure that things aren't getting wrongly classified. The last one in here is user agents as well. So a lot of user agents are just not recognized. Audio user agents are just not as recognized. And so they get flagged. So as an industry, we do need to come together to better understand the user agents, make sure we're weeding out the ones that are not clean or could hurt what we're trying to do here as an industry to build out this medium and more in a more thoughtful way. Sorry about that, guys. I have a little dog, and that's him contributing to the conversation as well. But yeah, so user agents is definitely another one. I know there are industry efforts to try to bring all of that information together and have all these different folks contribute so that you can eventually present to the IAB and have those whitelisted or permitted to or allow listed. So that's definitely a good initiative as well, and something we're very excited to see. The other couple of things that I'll just mention really quick is that it doesn't stop at the ad experience. We can use that behavior in the ad experience to better understand what's happening beyond the ad. So consider things like spin fraud, royalty diversion, artist spoofing. You can get certain parameters of the tracks themselves to understand, is someone trying to dupe the system? Are they trying to get royalties? Are they trying to make it to the top of like these best to listen to lists? And there's so many ways to dupe the system. We just want to make sure that we're catching it so that, again, we're helping sustain that ecosystem of storytelling, journalism, and of course, creative process in the form of music. The last thing I'd like to mention over here is brand safety. So no surprise here, brand safety is becoming a bigger and bigger concern for advertisers as well. Brand safety in podcasting is something we can talk about in more detail. In music streaming, it gets a little bit complicated. Simply because there's so many more things to consider in music streaming. While it can be done from a technical standpoint, we have to consider what that means for creativity itself and find a way to not just have brand safety parameters added to things like genres, but really go a little bit deeper as well, where some folks are trying to figure it out for sure. But there's definitely room for us all to work together to find something that's more meaningful and something that keeps the industry moving forward, but also allows for that level of safety for a brand. So let's talk about what that brand safety would mean. So it's contextual intelligence, essentially. And what that means is that we would take the MP3 files for audio, let's say podcasting, just to keep it simple, and we transcribe those. Now, the contextual intelligence has to be smart enough to figure out that there's not a one-to-one match happening with keywords. What are the keywords that show up on the page? How many times are they showing up? What's the frequency? Do they show up at the top, at the bottom, the last paragraph? What are the other words showing up alongside it? So that you can better understand context and not just whether a keyword has shown up. Some examples, and there's so many of them, but some examples would include distinguishing the word knife when it's violent content versus knife when you're talking about a recipe. You have to go deeper into that as well to understand things like sentiment. You know, if you're talking about knife in a murder mystery or like one of those murder podcasts versus knife in a different context, you want to be able to provide that level of understanding. I think the bigger opportunity here is brand suitability, which will help unlock additional inventory. So podcasting has a discovery challenge, which is something we've been trying to solve for as an industry too. So that brand suitability will allow for additional podcasts to be unlocked that may not exist in the traditional category that you would normally go after. Tone of voice is a consideration to keep in mind. Think about sarcasm, think about like anger, think about all these different emotions in your voice that you don't generally see, that you don't generally pick up on when you're writing. It could be very different when you're writing sarcastically versus speaking sarcastically. So to end this, really, audio is an awesome place to be. It's a great opportunity. There's no denying that we all have to work together and collaborate to figure out the measurement piece. The good news is we're all here right now, so we've already begun that process. But yeah, so we're very excited to see what's going to be coming next.
Thanks very much, Mimam. It's really good to hear from you. Really appreciate you taking us through that and a really interesting session. Now we're going to move on to our next keynote from Benjamin from Triton Digital, and he's going to present both the strategy and best practices for the programmatic monetization of online audio. And I know many of you are interested in programmatic opportunities in this channel, so it'd be really interesting to hear from Benjamin on this. So over to you, Benjamin. I mean, if you could,
Thank you.
Yeah, wrap it up in 15 minutes, that'd be great. Thanks very much.
Yes, I'll do that. I'll share my screen. All right, do you hear me and do you see my screen?
Yeah, all good.
Perfect. All right, so today I'll be presenting some of the trends we're observing in the programmatic marketplace. The goal here is to give you some ideas of what others may be doing, and I'll be comparing trends between the Europe as well as globally. So as a quick reminder, we've been in business for 15 years and we have clients across the whole world. So the trends I'll be showing is coming from activities in more than 80 countries. So basically what we're seeing here is if we look at the regional revenue growth, you see that the US is clearly dominating compared to the other regions, such as Europe, which is second, but like quite smaller compared to the US. But if you remove the US, you can see that Europe has grown quite well year over year. So June 2020 from June 2021. Also, as a note, if you haven't followed previous numbers, June 2020 was back to normal, actually quite positive. So it was no longer hit by COVID-19 advertising impact. So we're comparing, like, I would say almost 2 regular months here. And LATAM has actually decreased a bit last year. As you may know, from a health consideration, Latin America took a while before getting back on its feet. But we saw Asia picking up a nice pace there as well. So if we look at the regional growth, so even though the US might be the biggest in the chart, you can see that the growth is positive. Everything is positive actually, except Vietnam and the Czech Republic, but it's not the fastest growing market. So Canada, Spain, Belgium, Germany are the fastest growing, followed by United Kingdom, as well as Brazil and Portugal. So as you can see here, Europe is actually well positioned in terms of embracing programmatic audio. So that's a good thing. It brings a lot of revenues to the publishers. If you compare the audience growth, so it's a bit similar. Actually, we're seeing a growth across so the previous slides were the revenue growth, and this is the audience growth. So you're seeing that there's a surge of consumption in the US as well as in Europe. If we remove the US, which is the largest market, you can see that LATAM, as you may have seen on the previous slide, was decreasing in terms of the revenues. However, in terms of audience, it really grew. And Asia also blossomed. So India is one of the key driver, but we've seen also a lot of the Southeast Asian countries embracing online audio and podcasts. We have different, like a diverse client compositions from broadcasters, whether they're TV or radio broadcasters, as well as podcast networks and others. So the point here is, when I'm showing the stats, is to understand that it's coming from a diverse group of publishers, from known groups like Prisa or NRG or Carnival in Turkey, but we also have in-game application like AudioMob and Zemeho, which are putting audio ads inside games. But we also have music services like Deezer, as well as aggregators like iVoox. So we have like a vast array of different type of publishers. So when you look at the revenues per publisher type, you can see that publishers doing streaming, so radio, TV, are the lion's share. Or the majority, I would say. The on-demand, these are music services or other service that calling us on-demand. So they're the second biggest, and podcasts are about 10% of all of the revenues globally. If we take a look at Europe, actually, podcasts is actually quite, it's actually even bigger than on-demand. So we've seen a tremendous growth in the podcast space and programmatic podcasts, driven by activities in the UK, but also France, Germany, and other countries in the UK. As a reminder, when we talk about programmatic, you have a lot of rules that can make sure it's brand safe, both as an advertiser, but as well as a publisher. What I wanted to show here is the type of setup that publishers will make available. So what we're seeing in the last 30 days compared to the previous 30 is that pre-roll has grown a bit. So that could be pre-roll on podcasts as well as streaming, followed by mid-roll that grew just by 5%. But we're seeing a decrease of post-roll positions. So those would only exist in podcasts, though, since you can't put a post-roll ad inside a stream. Also, we have open exchange. When I talk about the programmatic marketplace, I mean the open marketplace, private marketplace, as well as deals. So when we compare here in the last 30 days versus the previous 30 days, we see that the open marketplace grew. So it's true that a lot of publishers will think that the way to transact, programmatically speaking, is through deals, and that's still the case in most of the time, though we've seen in the last month in June, I don't have that stats, but I know I can share that programmatic became bigger than direct advertising globally across all of the world, including the US. And the open marketplace is the fastest grower, but we're also seeing an increase in private marketplace as well as deals. And in terms of the type of auction, first price auction are clearly the one that is increasing the fastest versus fixed price or second price auction, which are actually decreasing. We're working a lot of DSPs, from top tier DSPs like Google, the Trade Desk, Amazon, as well as specialized DSPs like AdsWiz, but also Dynamic, Hawk, and others, as well as DSPs managed by representing sales house like the Target Bidders and things like that. So when we compare year over year, the DSP compositions across the globe, we're seeing that the Trade Desk is clearly the one that is driving a lot of the growth in the programmatic audio, followed by Google, Xandr, and then all of the DSPs connected on BitSwitch. And then we're also seeing Central and Tammo that are actually quite good in terms of how much they grew globally. When we looked into the European landscape, we see that Google is the number one. So the Trade Desk has had a huge growth, but is ranked, I would say, fourth. So Google is the number one, followed by Hawk, which is a French DSP, but operating across the globe. And then Xandr and the Trade Desk taking the rest of the space. And Adobe has decreased, as well as MediaMath, a bit in year over year. When we looked at where the type of consumptions and the players, so what we're seeing is globally, year over year, anyone consuming audio, whether it's podcast or streaming on iOS, has grown 184%, and on Android 150%. So a quite positive growth, dominated by led by Apple. When we looked into the Europe, though, it's actually different. So iOS also grew by 169%. However, we see that Android-based consumption almost grew 3x. I suppose that would be explained by the diversity of the European landscape. So in many countries, actually, Android is far a dominant player versus, let's say, France and the UK, where iOS will be dominant. But it's interesting to see the position that Android is taking in the space. When we looked at the revenues, though, we can still see that most of the revenues will be coming from iOS. So the first pie, I forgot to put the title. So the first pie here, 45-55, this is for globally. And the second pie, this is for Europe. So since you've seen in the previous slide that the UK, Spain, France were dominating the space, it's not surprising that iOS fare well in Europe compared to Android, but I'm pretty sure we'll see a reverse of that trend once we compare it with in a year from now, based on what we're seeing in terms of activities. In terms of the revenues, again, we're seeing, sorry, actually, the other slide was last month and the last year. So this is just European. So when we see it here, year over year in Europe as well as the last month. So we're seeing that Android actually picked over in the last 30 days. So that this actually explained the trends I was explaining just a bit before. Sorry about that confusions on the graphs. And in terms of smart speakers globally, so year over year, smart speaker composition decreased by 10%, and in the last 10 days increased by 14%. However, in Europe, we see a surge of smart speaker consumption year over year, in the last 30 days by 12%. So I think a lot of people confined at home in Europe started using smart speakers to consume audio. And then in terms of revenues, we see that even though generally speaking, globally, smart speakers decreased a bit, I would say the US is vastly dominating the market, and also the US was a bit quicker at going back at the office than many countries in Europe. And then we're seeing where we're seeing the growth outside of the US. Actually, if I use the other slide, we'll see without the US. So we see the Netherlands followed by Spain. And then if we stick to Europe, we have Belgium, France, and the UK and Germany that are part of that composition of revenues flowing via smart speakers. And then if you don't want to do all of those strategies by yourselves using an SSP like the Triton SSPs, you can also rely on sales house that are connected to our stack. So you can ask them to recommend the best solution or represent you. So we have everything you need from self-serve tools as well as relying on partners that are connected to our system. So thank you for this. So you have my contact info. So if you want me to share the slide deck, I'm happy to do that. So you have both my mobile phone as well as my email. So the mobile phone is extra +44 based in the UK. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Benjamin. Really appreciate that. Really great to hear, and it's such a great insight into programmatic audio, and it's great to hear how we can keep audio inventory in the spotlight in an increasingly competitive landscape. Now, next up, we have Lee Thompson, who's the Strategy Director at Audio One for our next session, where he'll share the latest research from IAB Ireland's Audio Council on digital audio consumption and behaviour. So over to you. He's just been transported through the Zoomiverse. There he is. Hi, Lee. Ready when you are. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Hi, Ryan. Can you hear me?
Yeah, all good.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. Well, look, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lee Thompson. I'm the Strategy Director at Audio One, Ireland's largest digital audio marketplace. First off, I'd like to thank IAB Ireland for asking me to represent its Audio Council, and also to congratulate IAB Europe for organising a really exciting and helpful virtual event. By way of setting the scene, I think it's important to let you know that Ireland is indeed an audio-loving country. And in fact, the backstory to digital audio's strong growth and momentum in a few years derives from both our love of music, our love of radio, but also our fondness for a good story well told. And in fact, with 81% of adults listening each weekday to radio, we have here in this country one of the highest daily radio listening rates in the world. So conscious of this and also aware that something exciting was happening in the digital audio space, IAB Ireland launched its Audio Council in 2018. In early 2019, IAB Ireland, supported by its membership, acted quickly and decisively and decided to invest in research aimed at helping size and profile the audience listening to digital audio in Ireland. It commissioned a local company, Red Sea, to carry out research into the digital audio usage and behaviours of the Irish population. These surveys have been conducted online with a representative sample of over 1,000 adults every year since. And the latest instalment and third wave of the research was conducted in early June this year. And over the following slides, I will be presenting the key findings. One important footnote to the research is when it was carried out in relation to the COVID restrictions that were in place at that time. This particular wave, as I've said, was carried out in June 2021, meaning that a lot of the restrictions had been lifted. So we'd regained our liberties to a very large extent. Whereas the last time that research was carried out in September 2020, at that time, Ireland was in lockdown level 2, operating under far more severe restrictions. So I guess the results from this wave need to be appraised in that light. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll just dive into the research findings. Okay, so the first slide relates to reach, and what you can see here is that 71% of Irish adults listen to digital audio at least once each week. This equates to 2.53 million people. This figure might be familiar to some of the Irish listeners on the call, as it doesn't show any growth from the last wave, which ran in September 2020, but because of increased mobility in the population, this is not very surprising.
Lee, sorry, just to interject, we can't see the slides that you're presenting in a minute.
You can't see the slides?
No. Have you shared the screen on the Zoom?
Let me see. Hold on one sec.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. Here we go. Perfect.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you, Ryan.
No problem.
Okay, so as I was saying, 71% of Irish adults listen to digital audio at least once each week. This equates to over 2.5 million adults. And this figure might be familiar to some of the Irish listeners on the call, as it shows no growth on the last wave, which ran in September 2020. But because of the increased mobility in the population, this is not really surprising. And if anything, in my view, it confirms, if you like, that the behaviors learned and the habits formed during lockdown in 2020, when we saw the first real surge in digital audio listenership, have been sustained. Incremental reach is a very important concept as it relates to the percentage of audience consuming digital audio who are not reachable by FM radio. And here we can see that 15% of digital audio listeners do not listen to FM radio. And this is up from 7% in 2020, and shows how digital audio can be relied upon to add more and more cover to FM radio campaigns when planned alongside. But of course, it can also deliver scaled audiences on its own. This slide talks about incremental reach by age group and channel. And what you can see is that the gain in net reach is most noticeable amongst the 18 to 34-year-old age cohort. And if you look next at incremental reach by channel, you will see that the gain in net reach is most noticeable for on-demand music and podcast listening. So what do digital audio users listen to on a weekly basis? You can see clearly here that the most popular type of digital audio content is on-demand music. So think Spotify, think Google Play, think SoundCloud. And on-demand music really has been, since the start, the engine driving digital audio consumption in Ireland. Next comes live radio listening, followed by podcast. And since the last wave, we've seen some gains for on-demand music and podcast, whereas combined radio, which includes live radio, catch-up radio, and radio aggregator services, have remained largely static. Podcasts have recorded the biggest wave-on-wave percentage increase in consumption. So what is the frequency of digital audio listening by content type? So this slide shows the proportions of people listening to digital audio over different time frames. So on the left, you can see daily, in the middle, weekly, and on the right, monthly. So 33% of digital audio listeners are listening daily. This equates to a figure of almost 1 million adults, of whom close to 250,000 are listening to on-demand music, and fractionally less are listening to combined radio. And from a monthly perspective, 2.7 million, or over 3/4 of the Irish adult population, is listening to digital audio at least once monthly. When we look at average weekly consumption, we can see that this has actually fallen in the most recent wave from the position in September 2020. Although, as we've already mentioned, reach has remained steady. We discussed earlier, and I believe that this is certainly related to the opening up of the economy, and the consumption figures of 15.3 hours, which represents a 7% slippage on the last wave, still represents a significant gain from the 2019 position. Clear that men and younger age groups over-index here. So we can see higher consumptions among 18 to 34-year-olds, and this is particularly the case for 25 to 34-year-olds who are spending 20 hours per week with the medium. And males appear to devote more of their time than females to digital audio. There's a lot going on in this slide, but the key point is to look closely at how listeners differ depending on the type of content that's being listened to. And it might just help for simplicity just to look at the bars that are ringed. So by looking at age first, we can see here that young people, so 18 to 34-year-olds, spend by far the most time with on-demand music. Live radio appears to attract most time from 55 to 64-year-olds, whereas podcasts attract most time from 25 to 34-year-olds. By looking at social class, we can see that on-demand music seems to attract a lot more time from ABC ones than any other social class groupings. And finally, by looking at gender, we can see that the time spent listening to both live radio and on-demand music is largely similar. Okay, so let's turn now to digital audio behavior. Unsurprisingly, we can see here that the smartphone continues to be the primary consumption device used to listen to digital audio. Car consumption comes in joint second at 28%, with smart speakers regularly used in 25% of cases. Consumption via smart speaker as the most used device has actually grown by 50% in the space of 9 months. And I think that's very noteworthy. And to delve a little bit deeper into the smart speaker world, if you like, we can see here that over 1/3, so 35% of Irish households now have a smart speaker. This is up 25% from the position in September 2020, and underlines the fact that smart speakers in a short period of time have become firmly established as mainstream access devices in the home. And 14% of those households that do not currently have a smart speaker intend to buy one over the next year. Okay, so what are the top activities people are engaged with when listening to digital audio? These activities have been largely unchanged over the course of the last 3 waves of this research. And interestingly, you can see parallels with the primary environments for radio consumption. So at home, in car. But because digital audio is portable, we can also see strong consumption levels where people are out and about, exercising, socializing, commuting, working, and studying. What are the top content verticals accessed? Well, obviously, the type of content consumed is influenced by the relative popularity of the digital audio content being consumed. So it's no surprise that music on the far left is number 1 because of the predominance of on-demand music listening, but also music radio. This is followed by news and politics, and then you have sport. Then you start to see some of the stronger podcast verticals shining through. such as comedy and entertainment, society and culture, lifestyle and health. So with an eye to the future, we wanted to ask people about their past consumption history, but also their intentions around consumption going forward. And you can see here again, starting on the left, 44% agreed that they're listening to more digital audio now than they were a year ago, with 30% saying they intend to listen more to digital audio over the next year. And this represents a 30% lift for the same question asked 9 months ago. The rise on the right in podcast consumption is even more marked, okay, with 60% saying they now listen to more podcast content than they did a year ago, and almost a third confirming that they will be increasing their podcast consumption over the next year. As a relatively newly formed habit, we wanted to find out where media time for digital audio consumption was coming from. And so we asked which media were being consumed less as a result of people consuming digital audio. And we discovered that time with traditional FM radio was more likely to be traded for digital audio time, and that's a 35% figure. This was followed by TV and online video, and even 20% of survey respondents said that they were spending less time on social media as a result of their time investment in digital audio. Okay, so on this slide, what we did is we presented qualitative statements to the survey respondents, the goal being to see how strongly they agreed with these statements. And as you can see, nearly half of the respondents agreed that they've discovered new content as a result of their digital audio listening. I think that's a very powerful result, as it confirms that there's this kind of discovery mindset, frontier spirit, if you like, associated with digital audio content consumption. And I think that presents a great insight for brands as they look to connect, I suppose, more intimately with digital audio listeners. Also, on the right-hand side, 39% of survey respondents said that they were happy to listen to ads in return for great free content. This represents a 50% lift, again, on the same question asked 9 months ago, which I guess is good news for all of us because it reflects an increased openness and acceptance of the importance of advertising, or the role of advertising in funding great free content. So really, we're coming to the end now. And I guess the key summary points for me from this wave of research, first of all, I think the wave presents a very strong set of results. The large gains in listenership we saw in the last wave have been consolidated over the intervening 9 months. That this has happened precisely at the same time as COVID restrictions have been fully lifted, I think reveals that digital audio has become an important component part of our media day, whether that's locked indoors or outside, free to roam. The numbers are impressive. 2.5 million people are accessing digital audio weekly, with almost 1 million accessing daily. And critically, the net unduplicated reach versus FM radio has doubled to 15%, proving that this medium now delivers meaningful levels of additional cover, especially in the areas of on-demand music and podcast. So look, that's it from me. Thank you for your time. I hope you found the results interesting, and I'd encourage any of the local IAB country chapters who are keen to develop their own currency or a benchmark for digital audio to reach out to us here in Ireland, as our approach, I believe, has definitely helped build confidence among the agency and client community here in digital audio.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Lou. Really appreciate that. Certainly provides some food for thought when it comes to digital audio trends in the audience. So yeah, I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more in this space. So thank you again for that.
You're welcome.
Now, we move over to the topic of podcasts with Adam Bowie, the Business Development Manager at the BBC World Service. And so he's going to talk through 10 podcast trends that you need to know. And Adam, I am going to ask if you can keep as close to those 10 minutes as possible as you fly through the Zoomiverse to be with us on stage. 10 podcast trends in 10 minutes from Adam Bowie from the BBC, and then we'll be on to our final session. So over to you, Adam.
Thanks very much, Ryan, and I will indeed try and keep to that 10-minute mark. So I'm from the BBC World Service and Business Development Manager there, and we produce a wide range of podcasts in a multitude of languages, from the very popular global news podcast at 13 Minutes to the Moon, most recently the really excellent Lazarus Heist, which I highly recommend. And we have advertising our podcast outside the UK, sold via our partners at Acast and BBC Advertising. So I'm just going to try a fancy transition. And there we go. I'm going to go through my top 10 podcast trends in 10 minutes. It's a top, there's a lot's been going on. It's only a top 10 trends, but let's get cracking on. Okay, so before I start the 10, I always like to talk about this a little bit. It's internet consumption, and we're a global business, so we look at it globally, even though this is a European event. The ITU says around 51% of the world's population by 2019 had internet access. So that's roughly speaking about 4 billion people, with just under 4 billion people who still don't have. So there is a big mountain to climb. And if we look at it that way, there's a large market that we still got to reach. So let's get into the top 10. And first of all is Android versus iOS. There are around 4.9 billion mobile phones in use globally. So that's out of about 7.7 billion people, as I just said, of which 3.8 billion are smartphones. So if you're into podcasting, or in fact, anything really digital, that's basically your addressable audience, 3.8 billion people, if we equate a smartphone to a person. But what's interesting is that despite what you probably see amongst your peer groups or in your country, most of those phones are Android. And it's interesting just hearing actually from one of the previous speakers from Triton there about that Android thing. And that's important because it really doesn't reflect in our podcast consumption stats, which brings us straight on to number 9. And that is what we often think of as a platform battle. And it's normally presented as Apple versus Spotify. And that's kind of interesting. Now, there's 2 sets of stats recently that Pod News, the podcasting newsletter, published. And the first is from Libsyn, which is a long-standing podcast host who they published their stats. And they showed that Apple Podcasts is massively big in comparison to Spotify and basically all the other players. On the other hand, another company called Buzzsprout put out a very different set of numbers, which puts Apple and Spotify on very level numbers. Now, they have a different kind of clientele, if you like. So they're a newer company, and maybe the kind of podcasts they carry are slightly different. All this really is to say that we should just be wary about this. Different sources will provide different numbers. Apple Podcasts probably still is the biggest platform, but more people around the world use Android phones, which is and Apple Podcasts is not available on Android. So that's kind of an interesting thing there. And the one other thing to think about is that if Google Podcasts was added to what they call Google Mobile Services, so that's, if you think about it, Gmail, Google Maps, etc., in Android, everything could change even further, if it became a default podcast app in the way that Apple Podcasts is on iOS. Anyway, number 8, there are many podcasts, and this has been mentioned a couple of times. When I checked 2 days ago, there were just shy of 2.3 million podcasts, according to Podcast Industry Insights, who count them. That's on Apple Podcasts, and that number will have gone up by now. That represents around 54 million podcast episodes, and about 32% of them are active based on the definition of having new episodes in the last 90 days. And this obviously ignores anything that's not on Apple, and that's a growing number, as we see. But just the question is, does the number actually matter? How many songs does Spotify have? Is it 30 million or 70 million? 70 million, according to their press site. And a random number I looked up, in 2018, there were 188,000 published titles, books, magazines, you name it, in the UK. They're big numbers, and what do they really mean? Actually, the big challenge here is really the underlying thing is discovery. Is from a listener challenge, from a consumer challenge, it's discovery. Anyway, moving on to number 7, one of my favorites, celebrities. Do you know a celebrity? Do they have a podcast? If not, are they going to have a podcast? Now, Renegades with Barack Obama and Bruce Springsteen from Spotify is possibly the ultimate celebrity podcast, although maybe the Harry and Meghan one will run it a close second. I don't know. But there have been a lot. And, the question is this a good thing or a bad thing? So recently, the writer and critic Fiona Sturgis wrote a really good piece actually in The Guardian, asking if celebrities are ruining podcasting. In fairness, she probably didn't write the headline. Sub-editors do that. But she's not the only one with a bit of a bee in her bonnet about it. A certain me wrote something on my own blog at the end of last year. And look, it's unfair to tie everyone with the same brush. There are clearly excellent podcasts produced by celebrities, and some of the very best of them indeed. And Fiona's piece highlights some of them, as do I. But there's definitely been a flurry. And one celebrity interviewing their celebrity friend without anyone being particularly ruthless with the editing software isn't probably doing anyone any favors. And look, I get it. We've had lockdown. The podcast industry was possibly one of the few things you could actually get involved in. If you're a comedian, you couldn't tour, and lots of the gigs were no longer available for you. But there are some challenges there. Anyway, let's look at the pros and cons of celebrity podcasts. The pros, well, celebrities actually broaden the appeal of podcasts. If you've never listened to a podcast before, and a lot of people still haven't, then a celebrity might get you involved. And they're massive in other parts of the industry. So what, and popular culture. So why wouldn't they be? Comedy and entertainment are two of the biggest podcast categories, and pandemic, right? Downside, well, they suck up a lot of that oxygen. And when discovery is limited, and they also, if you're paying a celebrity a lot of money, that's less money for other people to go around. And quite a lot of them aren't very good. Don't tell anyone. Look, I suspect some people will discover this after a while. And, if there is or isn't a pot of gold, maybe they'll move on. But things to consider. Anyway, move on. Time. Number 6, social audio. And what I really mean by this is Clubhouse. Obviously exploded onto the scene last year, and then its growth carried on this year. Then it stalled a bit. Then they released an Android app, and maybe it's growing again. But what's the problem anyway? This isn't podcast, right? I'm talking about podcasts. Well, we'll get into that, but everyone's getting involved in this area. Twitter's got Spaces, Spotify's just launched Green Room, Facebook's got its live rooms coming up, and you can see, and that's probably not a complete list of other people who are going to be getting involved into this social audio thing. The challenge is, as the Netflix Reed Hastings once said, is when saying that his company was competing with sleep, is that you've only got a finite amount of time to be listening to anything. And recently, Mark Mulligan from Media Research expanded on this a little bit and talked about, where's the space for social audio with streaming, with podcasts, what gives, where does that come into play? So none of us know that. And I think, we're only seeing the launches of some of these things right at the moment. So, how this pans out in the medium or longer term, remains to be seen. Number 5, lots of people have talked about advertising today, so I'm only going to be really brief on this. But I think we are seeing a little bit of a shift away from direct response towards brand advertising. So slightly fewer offer codes in podcasts as being a way, which I think, is obviously growing the industry, which is great. And we're seeing probably a shift a little bit from baked in towards dynamic advertising. Although I've got to say, as someone who listens to a lot of American podcasts, I still hear far too many ads for things I can't buy in the UK. Elsewhere, this is a controversial one, and not everyone will agree with it because it is a profitable part of the business. Host reads. I think as dynamic grows, it becomes challenging to keep host reads growing because can you really expect your host to read potentially hundreds of different ads to scale around the world? And then undoubtedly we're going to see a rise in programmatic, but others can probably talk about that further. Number 4, thinking beyond English. We're doing this conference in this day in English, and most people still think exclusively, not necessarily everyone on this call, hopefully, think about podcasting in English, but there is a whole world out there, and we're beginning to see companies now getting involved beyond English. Wondery, I think, has led the way a long way on this, and we're seeing iHeart get involved now. And definitely at the BBC World Service, we're thinking strongly about our international languages offering. Okay, number 3, big one here, subscriptions. How to be subscriptions, how to monetize your podcast. It's the big new thing. Well, I say new, but you've had things like Patreon have been kicking around for a while. Supporting Cast makes it a little bit easier for people to support some of their favorite podcasts. And now we're seeing the likes of Apple, Spotify, Acast Plus offering their own subscription packages. But I think we just need to, just rein in our excitement and enthusiasm just a little bit, because, look at your average subscription level. And I don't think by any means this is complete. This is, potentially just your media spend in a very broad terms. And then you might add in all your other things that you spend money on in the subscriptions, which could be anything from coffee to food. And, is there a limit to the number of things that consumers are really willing to subscribe to? I'm not going to discount this entirely. I think it all remains unproven at the moment. And actually for some smaller or more niche ones, it can and probably will continue to be really important. But massive, massive growth, don't know. We'll see. Okay, number 2, exclusivity. And I think this can be summarized by these 2 images. So a little while ago, if you wanted to listen to pretty much every podcast on the planet, this is what your phone looked like. You had one podcast app, it's probably Apple Podcasts, and you could listen to anything. Today, if you want to listen to everything, this is a bit more what it looks like, because Spotify has exclusive, BBC Sounds, we have exclusives, Luminary is built on exclusives, Amazon's Audible has exclusives, Stitcher's had exclusives, Amazon is talking about now having at least Windows stuff and possibly exclusives down the line as well. So it's getting a more complex ecosystem. Obviously, that's what happens, the norm in TV. But in video, where you've got to watch different things on Prime that you watch on Netflix, etc., or Disney Plus. But yeah, I think it's challenging, particularly for people who are used to listening to everything in one app, and there may be issues down the line with that. And also, I'm not going to get into, if it's not an open RSS, is it actually a podcast? That's one of the great questions of our time. We just haven't got time for that today. Okay, number 1, M&A, mergers and acquisitions, consolidation. And of course, the big player in that, undoubtedly Spotify. It's the big beast. They'd already bought Gimli, Anchor, Parcast. Then he went shopping for more, most recently Pods. But they bought Betty Labs, which gives them their green room. They bought Megaphone, the ad tech company, and now they're not alone. I mean, I put this slides together, a couple of months ago, and I keep having to update them. Sirius XM and iHeart, 2 big American commercial radio groups have been shopping a lot. Sirius just bought 99% Invisible, very popular podcast. Amazon, they bought Wondery a little earlier in the year, then they've been shopping again, most recently Smartless only last week. For quite a lot of money. And then actually in Europe, something else has just been bought by Sony. So there's a lot of acquisitions. And then you've got mid-tier below that. You've got companies like Vox or The Athletic and plenty of other ones that, potentially are on the sales board. So there's undoubtedly there has been consolidation. It won't always work, but some of it will. And there's going to be more consolidation. The challenges are going to be the smaller players, because these big ones suck out the oxygen of publicity, and they have the ones with the big PR budgets and the ability to make those podcasts visible. If you own your own platform and you place your own podcast exclusively or non-exclusively on that platform, then you've got an enormous advantage over those who don't have that luxury. Anyway, that's it. Sorry, I know my time is up, and transition back to me. Hope that was useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. That's brilliant. Really, really appreciate you giving us that quick update. It was amazing. So thank you very much. So now we're going to move on to our final keynote presentation of the day from Oliver van Versch, from the founder and CEO and consultant for IAB Tech Labs. And he's going to share some key updates on digital audio, global technology standards. So I'm going to hand it over to Oliver now. Hopefully he'll make it through onto the stage in just a moment. We are going to have to drop the Q&A from this section, unfortunately, just to ensure we can keep to time. Oh, can you, there he comes in now.
So, hi.
Hi, Oliver. Over to you.
Thank you. So there is not much time left for introductions and all the nice parts. So that was a really inspiring presentation, and it's really difficult for me to move over to odd technology stuff now for the last couple of minutes of this session. But what we have learned so far, I guess, is a lot around growing market, podcast, digital audio, a lot of creativity in the market, a lot of diversity, and also market development, and of course of heavy growth in this segment. And what is needed in a heavily growing segment are technology standards. So I'm talking a bit about that, what my customers, so I'm a consultant, I'm running a small consultancy company, what my customer IAB Tech Lab is doing in this domain by means of technology development and making sure that podcast gets a channel which is professionalized in a technology enabled way. So where do we stand? Where do we come from? By means of digital audio, we come from a lot of heterogeneity. We come from RSS feeds, which require where you download the digital audio piece from. We are coming from a distribution, a diverse distribution of a platform. So a publisher is not a publisher like it is in the internet world. A publisher is producing the content. He uploads it to a platform. The platform plays it out. Sometimes the platforms, as we all know, have their own rules. And then in between, there are podcast hosting companies. So there is a lot of complexity in this domain. And by means of measurement, that of course causes a lot of complexity as well. So there is a lack of access to client-side measurement, which we are used to from a classical internet world and from programmatic advertising. To do client-side measurement is crucial to measure reach and to measure ad performance and delivery and things like viewability, which are of course not applicable to podcasts. But there is a lot of questions in this market, which are caused by the fact that it is still under development. There are some set challenges in server-side measurement. If you are into technology, you definitely know that. So you have to base your analysis on server logs. That is complex. You cannot differentiate between a play and a download. That is also threatening. And there are myriads of other complexities in server-side measurement. What we are trying to develop, what IAB Tech Lab is doing, is in our podcast measurement guidelines, is to follow some key principles in measurement of the heterogeneous digital audio and podcast world. So let it base on industry best practices. So there are a lot of technologies and measurement already available from the video domain, talking about open measurement SDK for video and also to other channels. So there are industry best practices. The industry has been jointly developing standards for measurement for years, for actually more than 10 years. We should cover both ad and podcast content measurement, because that is crucial to the delivery, and also to the question like how to shed light into the podcast world, which is sometimes heterogeneous over platforms. You have to support in the future, and also the future is already starting, both programmatic, so dynamic ad insertion, and embedded advertising, so native. So some people call it native advertising, but programmatic is coming. Programmatic is strongly growing. You have to provide a set of metrics and a recommended process how to audit companies, and how companies can make sure that they are technically compliant. So overall, we believe that client-side measurement is the longer-term future for digital audio. What are we doing there? So what are we doing in our podcast measurement guidelines, which are constantly evolving? 4 metrics defined. Of course, the download. A download is not a download. So what makes a download a completed download, and what makes a listener a listener? So how long do they listen? When do they stop listening? When did they finish listening? So to create transparent metrics on that and guidelines on that one. When is an ad delivered? An ad apparently is not delivered when it's downloaded, but when it's heard. So that has to be respected in podcast measurement guidelines. and when is the client confirmed ad play taking part. So actually what happens technically between the content creator, the advertiser, the technologies between them and the platform. So what we are doing there by means of the podcast measurement guidelines is to develop a kind of recommended process, how filtering logics apply, how you can identify and aggregate unique users, unique downloads, and how you generate metrics and audit the process. So what is in taking part within this year is to have more language edits for more clarity. I learn with my team. We are talking to a couple of European markets on podcast measurement, to the local entities, that on the one hand, we see globally relevant technologies. On the other hand, we see local strength in content creation, and also local players being strong in this market, also in ad sales. And we see all the local measurement institutions. So there is a strong need for cooperation, on the one hand to develop global standards, and on the other hand to implement them into and adopt them into local markets with their specialties. IPv6 is a topic right now inside the podcast measurement guidelines. The filtering guidance for watch OS versus user agents, so making sure that a listener is not listening twice, at least it's not counted twice when the podcast starts on the watch and on the phone simultaneously, and to provide a number of additional podcast player recommendations. So the podcast measurement guidelines on the one hand come in hand with the podcast measurement compliance program from the TechLab side, which should ensure adherence to the guidelines and validates the base of principles which are being followed. This is something which affects or which is relevant to technology companies, so podcast hosting companies or companies doing having a holistic view on podcast production, delivery, ad sales, and services around that. And in the end, a company being verified, so we really audit companies. We closely work with the companies. It's a couple of months process. Taking a look at technical procedures, taking a look at technical details, taking a look at delivery and processes, making sure that the company can frequently self-audit them in the upcoming years. And in the end, you receive a compliance seal, which establishes a kind of industry trust. So what we hear from the local countries, from France, from Germany, from the UK, from Spain, Italy, and also other European countries, is there is a need for standardization. There is a need for trust and technical criteria in podcast delivery. And more companies follow this process, applying for filtering logics, applying for threshold logic. So those are some of the technical details we are looking into in the auditing process. Calculate uniques clearly, and of course, in the end, generate metrics. More companies also in Europe, the latest catch, so to speak, the latest company having been certified in Europe is ULab Media, which is a startup company strongly growing from Germany. But you see a couple of other international players, Acast working in almost every country in Europe, and others not so. So this is heavily growing since we experience a high demand for standardization, a high demand for reliability created through technical standards in this creative world where you see thousands of new podcasts every year, even more probably. So what next? What we are doing on is kind of broadening this. Of course, we are talking to a lot of countries, a lot of companies in these countries, and also to the local institutions. And there are a couple of other technical initiatives which are ongoing. So DAAST, which is the digital audio ad serving template, another TechLab standard, has been merged into VAST 4.1. I mentioned that. So video ad serving technologies offer all the convenience in measurement. They have been under development for 10 years. So there is a logic to push forward towards VAST, the video ad serving standard. Open measurement is an initiative which we will roll out through every channel which is emerging. And in the end, ads.text guidance, so to make sure that brand safety in programmatic brand suitability can be measured, can be identified, that there are tools for that, is also a thread which goes towards digital audio, which in the end goes into open RTB naturally. So thank you. That was too quick, probably. I'm happy to take like exactly one question because the time is up. I'm sorry for this brevity, but anyway, you will get the slides and reach out for questions to these email address later if you have some. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I think Alexandra is going to pop in just to say a couple of quick words.
Yes. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So thank you, Oliver, for your presentation. So it was supposed to be a little chat, but I'm going to transform it as to say that as a closing remark. So I have in fact three closing remarks. The first one is about cookieless world, because you are aware about the removal of the third-party cookies in 2023 by Google Chrome, and also the decrease of IFA. And also the focus on that is the alternative for the digital audio, because we are aware about the work on about REARC, about the taxonomy, etc. And like video, audio will have to benefit of that in order to keep growing in terms of revenue and enjoying and taking part of the contextual targeting and so on. Also about OpenRTB update. Yes, in the slide, Oliver talked about audio. As you can see, audio can request image, text, media for album, etc., etc. And also DAST merge into VAST. So a lot of things. Okay. So the idea, I think, we need to work on audio to maybe merge audio with video objects. Keep in mind, audio was part of OpenRTB in 2016. So I think there is a need of refresh in order to move on, because we have now podcast, streaming, radio, and so on. And like video, audio needs to be at the same level. And then my third part is about privacy. Yes, because as you can see, to identifying, to make the measurement, to tracking the user, etc., we need IP address, user agent, and so on, and also about the cookie, IFA, etc. But even if there are a lot of subscription services, we need also to talk about and move on about the TCF, about that, because TCF is part of display advertising, about video advertising, and of course, for the GDPR restriction, TCF has also to be part at the same level in audio digital. Voilà. That's it.
Thanks very much, Alexandra. Great to hear from you there. Alex, obviously the IAB Europe's technical director, coming in just to say some of his viewpoints on that. So thank you very much for that. So that brings us now to the end of the Digital Audio Day event, and I'm really thankful and delighted you were able to join us today. We've had people dialing in from across Europe, and we really hope you'll be able to meet many of you in person before too long, once we can get back out and about. I'd like to thank all of our panelists, moderators, and speakers for giving up their time, sharing their knowledge and their views on these important topics that were discussed and debated. And I'm sure many of our attendees will have taken an idea or a few, or maybe more than one idea away, and be used to improve their own business. I'd like to thank Helen Mussard and Lauren Wakefield for working tirelessly away in the background, and they've worked incredibly hard to deliver this event, so thank you very much to them. And finally, thank you to all of you, to the attendees, for tuning in. We really appreciate your time. The event recordings will be available on the IAB Europe website over the next few days, so keep your eye out for them, for anything that you may have missed. And as mentioned at the beginning of this event, all our speakers are from the IAB Europe member companies. And the IAB is the leading European level association for digital marketing and advertising ecosystems, and represents the national IAB's media, technology and marketing companies to lead political representation and industry collaboration to deliver framework standards and industry programs that enable digital agencies, businesses, digital advertising businesses to thrive in the European market. Our members span the entire digital advertising and marketing ecosystem, from publishers, DSPs, SSPs to agencies, and it really is an opportunity to meet, network and create great working relationships with leaders across Europe. So if you're keen to become a member and participate in any upcoming events or committees, please do get in touch with Helen or Lauren. That's it. So thank you very much one last time, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.